My grandfather opened an Italian restaurant back in the 1960s, shortly after he immigrated to the United States. It wasn't flashy or upscale back then, just a cozy little place with red checkered tablecloths, dim lighting, and the smell of garlic and tomato sauce always wafting through the air. Locals loved it. It became a gathering spot for families, friends, and anyone craving hearty, homemade Italian food. Over time, my parents took over and turned it into something bigger. They expanded the dining area, introduced some new dishes, and built relationships with just about everyone in the community. Growing up, the restaurant felt like a second home. Some of my earliest memories are of my dad teaching me how to roll dough in the kitchen or my mom letting me greet customers when I was barely tall enough to see over the hostess stand. For a while, I thought it was just a family thing, but as I got older, I realized how important it was to people. There were regulars who came in every week, couples who'd celebrated their anniversaries there for decades, and people who'd order the same dish every time and swear it was the best thing they'd ever eaten. When I turned 32, my parents decided it was time to pass the torch. They told me it was my turn to run the restaurant. At first, I wasn't sure I was ready for the responsibility. I mean, how do you follow up on something that had been a community staple for over half a century? But then I thought about how much the place meant to me, to my family, and to everyone who walked through those doors. I knew I couldn't let it stagnate. If anything, I felt this drive to push it forward, to make it something even bigger. I decided to modernize the restaurant. It wasn't an easy decision. There was always this voice in the back of my head warning me not to mess with a good thing, but I wanted to make it stand out in a way it never had before. I hired an interior designer and gave the place a sleek, updated look without losing its charm. The red checkered tablecloths were replaced with crisp white linens, and the dim lighting became warm, stylish fixtures. I also revamped the menu, keeping the classic dishes people loved, but adding some contemporary Italian options to appeal to a younger crowd. The real game changer, though, was marketing. I partnered with food bloggers, influencers, and even a few local TV personalities. They came, ate, and shared their experiences with their audiences, and before I knew it, the buzz around the restaurant skyrocketed. We started getting reservations from people who had never heard of us before, and word of mouth brought in a whole new crowd. Now, the restaurant has become something I never imagined. We're not just a local spot anymore. We've somehow turned into a destination. Celebrities have been spotted dining at our VIP tables, and those tables are booked months in advance. Surreal, honestly. Sometimes I'll step into the dining room, see the packed house, and have to remind myself that this is the same place where I used to sit as a kid, folding napkins and hoping my mom would let me sneak a cannoli before dinner. I'm proud of what we've accomplished, but I'd be lying if I said it hasn't been overwhelming. Running a restaurant at this level is a constant balancing act. Still, I can't help but think my grandfather would be proud of how far his little dream has come. I remember the evening like it was yesterday. The restaurant was buzzing as usual, full of people dressed to the nines, laughing over wine and beautifully plated dishes. I was making my usual rounds, checking in with the staff and chatting with a few regulars, when I noticed a group of 5 women walk in. They were loud, confident, and very much the kind of group you couldn't help but notice. Leading the pack was a woman who had this aura about her, like she was used to being in charge. She was tall, with perfectly styled hair, expensive-looking clothes, and the kind of smile that hinted she'd gotten her way more often than not. She looked about 30, a bit older than the other girls in her group, who were probably in their mid-20s. I didn't think much of it at first. Groups like this weren't uncommon. We had become the kind of place where people wanted to show off a little. But then she walked straight up to the hostess stand and, with the confidence of someone who owned the place, said, "I need a VIP table for 6. I'm a friend of the owner." The hostess glanced at me, unsure what to do. I could tell she was caught off guard, and honestly, so was I. I didn't recognize this woman, and I'm pretty sure I'd remember someone like her if she were a genuine friend of the owner. Still, I wasn't annoyed. If anything, I was curious. People like her always had a story, and I was in a good mood that night. So, instead of shutting her down or calling her out, I decided to play along and see where this would go. I stepped up to the hostess stand and introduced myself. "Hi, I'm Michael," I said with a friendly smile. "The owner." Her expression didn't change. If anything, she looked even more confident, as if my introduction confirmed something for her. "Oh, Michael. I'm Amber," she said, extending a hand. Her handshake was firm, but there was something performative about it, like she was trying to show me she was on my level. "I'm sure you don't remember me, but we've met before at a charity event. You're probably busy, so I'll make this quick. We need a VIP table for 6. I've been hyping this place up to my friends, and I just had to bring them here." I nodded, pretending to think it over. A VIP table for 6. Those are usually booked months in advance, I said, keeping my tone light. "But since you're a friend, let me see what I can do." Her face lit up. "I knew you'd come through," she said, practically beaming. I led them to the back of the restaurant, where the VIP section was located. As we walked, I noticed the younger girls trailing behind her, whispering and giggling amongst themselves. They seemed more like her entourage than her actual friends, hanging onto her every word. I wondered if they even realized she was bluffing. When we reached the section, I gestured to a table near the center. "Here we are," I said, pulling out a chair for her. "The best table in the house." Amber looked around approvingly and sat down, clearly basking in the moment. The other girls quickly took their seats, their excitement palpable. I could hear snippets of their conversation as I walked away. "I can't believe she knows the owner." And, "This place is amazing." I returned to the front of the house, trying not to laugh. Part of me admired her nerve, claiming to be my friend and demanding a VIP table without batting an eye. It was bold, no doubt about it. But I couldn't shake the feeling that she was up to something. I decided to give Amber and her group the full VIP experience, leading them to one of the most exclusive tables in the restaurant. It wasn't just any table, it was the table. The one tucked into a private alcove, surrounded by luxurious curtains, with the perfect view of the room. That table was normally reserved for A-list celebrities or high-profile clients willing to shell out $10,000 just to secure it for the evening. Amber's eyes lit up the moment she saw it, and she practically glowed with satisfaction as she sat down. She looked around at her friends like she was presenting them with a crown jewel. "This," she declared, "is exactly what I was talking about. Isn't it perfect?" The younger women around her nodded eagerly, echoing their agreement. I could hear their murmurs of awe as I stepped back, letting them settle in. Amber clearly enjoyed being the center of attention, and her confidence was undeniable. She waved me over as soon as they were seated. "All right, Michael," she said with a smile that was just shy of condescending. "This is my night. My friends and I are here to celebrate, and I want you to make it special. Let's start with 3 rounds of your most expensive cocktails. Surprise us." I played along. "Of course. I'll have them brought over right away," I said, making a mental note to keep an eye on the tab. I had a feeling this was going to be an interesting evening. The first round of drinks arrived shortly after. A tray of perfectly crafted cocktails with fancy garnishes and premium spirits. Amber raised her glass for a toast. "To living our best lives," she announced, and her friends cheered, clinking glasses and diving into the drinks like it was their last night on Earth. By the time the second round hit the table, Amber's bravado was on full display. She leaned back in her chair, laughed loudly, and made sure to throw a few comments my way every time I walked by. "Michael, you really know how to treat your guests," she said at one point, flashing me a smile. "No wonder everyone loves this place." The cocktails were on the house, my little way of keeping the atmosphere light and making sure the group felt comfortable. If this was all just an act on Amber's part, I was curious to see how far she'd take it. The third round came out not long after, and by now the group was fully relaxed and in party mode. Before their food was served, I approached Amber's table to handle one important detail. "Amber," I said, maintaining a professional tone, "since this is a VIP table, I'll need to register a credit card before we proceed. It's just a formality." Her response was instant. She reached into her designer purse and pulled out a sleek black credit card, handing it to me with the kind of confidence you'd expect from someone who owned a private jet. "Of course," she said, her tone almost dismissive. "Money is no problem." I took the card and glanced at it briefly before heading to the front to process it. Everything about her seemed polished and intentional, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her story. Something about the way she carried herself felt rehearsed, like she'd done this before. As the evening went on, Amber's group began to get comfortable, too comfortable. The once lively chatter quickly escalated into loud, obnoxious laughter that drowned out the soft background music. I caught snippets of their conversation every time I passed by, and it wasn't long before their true colors started to show. One of the girls, a brunette with a sharp tongue who they kept calling Jessica, caught my attention first. She flagged me down as I passed their table with a smug grin on her face. "Hey, Michael," she said, dragging out my name like it was some sort of joke. "Be honest. Do you ever feel like your life is, I don't know, worthless? I mean, you're just like a waiter, right?" The comment hit me harder than I expected, but I kept my composure. "Actually, I own the restaurant," I replied calmly, though it was clear she didn't care about the correction. She just shrugged and turned back to her friends, who were giggling like schoolgirls. From that point on, their behavior only got worse. They started talking loudly about their strategy for scoring VIP tables at places like mine, openly bragging about how they could manipulate people into giving them special treatment. I caught Amber saying, "It's all about confidence. If you act like you belong, no one will question you." Michael didn't, did he? She laughed, and the others joined in. Jessica chimed in, her voice dripping with mockery. "Yeah, he's way too weak to say no. Honestly, it's kind of sad." I was stunned. Here they were, enjoying premium service at a table that most people would have to pull serious strings to book, and they were openly ridiculing me like I wasn't standing a few feet away. It wasn't just disrespectful. It was infuriating. But I bit my tongue. For now. Amber, meanwhile, was still basking in the attention of her entourage. She threw out compliments about the food and drinks, but it was clear she was using it as another opportunity to gloat. "See?" she said to her friends, gesturing at the table. "I told you I could make this happen. You just have to know how to handle people." The whole group erupted into laughter, clinking their glasses again like they were celebrating some grand victory. I could feel my patience wearing thin, but I reminded myself that I had chosen to play along with Amber's charade. Now I was determined to see how far they'd go. Still, the more I listened to them, the more I wondered. Was this just a performance for her friends? Or was this who Amber really was? Either way, I was starting to regret giving them the benefit of the doubt. As the evening wound down, I decided it was time to wrap things up. Their behavior had been grating all night, but I kept my composure. The final bill was hefty $9,740, to be exact. Between the 3 rounds of our priciest cocktails, the truffle pasta dishes, and the oysters they ordered like they were popping candy, the number added up fast. Amber's group hadn't held back, treating the menu like an all-you-can-eat buffet for the elite. I approached their table with a polite smile, holding the leather folder containing the bill. Amber was mid-laugh, leaning back in her chair like she owned the place. The energy shifted the moment I set the bill down on the table. She glanced at it, her confident demeanor faltering for the first time all night. Her face paled visibly as she flipped open the folder and saw the total. She blinked a few times, clearly struggling to keep her composure, and then looked up at me with a forced smile. Michael," she said, her voice strained. "There's obviously been a mistake." I raised an eyebrow. "A mistake?" I asked, maintaining my polite tone. "I itemized everything for clarity, but if you'd like, I can go over it with you." Amber waved her hand dismissively, as though that would make the bill disappear. No, she said quickly, forcing a laugh. "I mean, there's just no way it's that much. I'm a friend of the owner, remember? Surely there's a discount for that, right?" Her voice grew louder on the word, discount, as though she was trying to remind me of our supposed connection in front of her friends. I could feel all their eyes on me, waiting to see how I'd respond. "I am the owner," I replied, keeping my tone calm but firm. "And I've already comped your cocktails tonight. Everything else on the bill reflects exactly what was ordered." Amber's face went through a series of expressions: shock, disbelief, and finally, something that resembled desperation. She hesitated for a moment, then leaned forward, lowering her voice. Michael, I think we both know this is a little excessive. I mean, come on, we're friends, right? It took everything in me not to laugh. I met her gaze evenly. Amber, you mentioned earlier that money wasn't a problem. I trust that's still the case. Her friends were whispering amongst themselves now, clearly aware that something was off. Amber's confidence was unraveling, and she was struggling to keep her usual composure. Of course, it's not a problem, she said quickly, though her tone betrayed her. It's just, well, this is unexpected. I crossed my arms and gave her a moment to figure out her next move. She glanced down at the bill again, her fingers tightening around the edges of the folder. Can I, pay some of it now and handle the rest later? She asked, her voice almost pleading. Unfortunately, we don't split payments like that for VIP reservations, I replied. We require full payment at the end of the evening. It's standard policy. Amber's facade was completely crumbling now. She looked around the table, clearly hoping one of her friends would step in and save her. But the younger women just exchanged nervous glances, avoiding eye contact with her. They weren't about to foot the bill for her grand show. Realizing she was cornered, Amber let out a shaky laugh. Okay, fine. Just charge the card I gave you earlier, she said, though her tone was far less assured than before. I nodded and left the table, card in hand, to process the payment. As I walked away, I couldn't help but feel a mix of satisfaction and curiosity. Amber had played the role of the high-rolling socialite all night, but it was clear now that she'd overplayed her hand. I wondered if this was how her little stunts usually ended, or if tonight was the first time her bluff had been called. Either way, the look on her face when I handed her the bill was one I wouldn't forget anytime soon. When I returned to Amber's table with her card, I couldn't resist addressing the elephant in the room. I placed the card and receipt down and smiled warmly, just enough to make her squirm. Amber, I said, my tone calm but firm. You mentioned earlier that we're friends. Funny thing is, I'm the only owner of this restaurant, and we've never met before. Her face froze. For a second, I thought she might try to bluff her way out of it. But then she plastered on an unconvincing smile and waved her hand dismissively. Oh no, you misunderstood. I meant I know the other owner. You know, the one who's usually here. I raised an eyebrow, amused by her audacity. Amber, I think there's been some confusion. I'm the sole owner of this restaurant. There's no one else. Panic flickered in her eyes, but she quickly tried to recover. She pulled out her phone and opened her messages. Wait, look, I've been texting with the owner. See? She held up the screen triumphantly, showing me a string of messages from a number saved as Michael Owner. The messages were vague at best. Mostly generic pleasantries about visiting the restaurant and how we'll make sure you're taken care of. I leaned in to get a closer look, then crossed my arms. That's not my number, I said flatly. But let's call him together, shall we? Her confidence evaporated. She stammered something about how she must have made a mistake, her fingers fumbling with her phone. The rest of the table was dead silent now, her friends looking at her with wide eyes. One of them, Jessica, even leaned back in her chair as if trying to distance herself from the whole mess. Amber's hands were shaking as she set her phone down on the table. I don't think that's necessary, she said, her voice breaking. It's probably just a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? I asked, still keeping my tone polite. Amber, you claimed to be my friend, demanded a VIP table, and ordered nearly $10,000 worth of food and drinks. Either you pay the bill, or we'll have to get the police involved. That did it. The tears started almost immediately. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking as she sobbed dramatically. I didn't mean for this to happen, she wailed. It was just supposed to be a fun night out. I didn't think it would get this far. I stayed quiet, giving her a moment to compose herself, though I could feel the eyes of every nearby table on us. Her friends were dead silent, avoiding my gaze and hers. No one offered to step in or help her out. Amber, I said after a pause, keeping my tone steady. This is a business. I can't let nearly 10 grand just slide because you didn't plan ahead. Either you pay the bill, or I'll have no choice but to call the authorities. She sniffled and looked up at me, her makeup now streaked from crying. See, can't we work something out? I mean, I don't have that much on my card right now. I sighed, knowing this conversation was going nowhere. Then you can call someone to help you cover it, I replied. Otherwise, I'll have to involve the police. Realizing she was out of options, Amber frantically started dialing someone on her phone. It was a painful few minutes of her whispering into the phone, begging whoever was on the other end to send her money. Eventually, she managed to scrape together enough to cover the bill barely. I waited patiently as she handed over her card again, her hands trembling. This time, the payment went through. When I returned with the receipt, she couldn't even look at me. She mumbled something that might have been an apology, grabbed her bag, and practically ran out of the restaurant. Her friends followed awkwardly, not saying a word. As soon as they were gone, the dining room seemed to exhale. A few tables whispered amongst themselves, and one regular even gave me a knowing nod, like they'd been rooting for me the whole time. I couldn't help but shake my head at the absurdity of it all. Amber had come in pretending to be someone important, trying to play a game she clearly wasn't equipped to win. In the end, she learned the hard way that not every bluff pays off. Amber's attempt to weasel her way out of the bill ended with her signing it in tears. By the end of the ordeal, her confident facade was completely gone. Her friends, who'd spent the entire night laughing and cheering her on, were now sheepishly digging through their purses to scrape together whatever cash and cards they could muster. It was a pitiful sight. Between all of them, they barely managed to cover the remaining balance. Amber scribbled her signature on the receipt with trembling hands, avoiding eye contact as she handed it back to me. Her face was blotchy, her makeup smeared from crying. Without another word, she and her friends slinked out of the restaurant, leaving behind an atmosphere thick with second-hand embarrassment. The regulars, who had been quietly observing the spectacle, gave me discreet nods of approval. One even chuckled under his breath as if to say, "Well played." I thought that was the end of it, but a few days later the drama came full circle. I was in my office going over invoices when one of my staff buzzed me, saying there was a man at the front demanding to speak to the owner. I sighed, already sensing where this was going. When I came out to the dining area, there he was, a well-dressed, middle-aged man standing next to none other than Amber. She looked mortified, staring down at the floor like a scolded child. The man, clearly her father, wasted no time. "Are you Michael?" he barked, his tone sharp and accusatory. "Yes, I am," I said, keeping my tone calm and professional. "How can I help you?" "This is outrageous," he shouted, gesturing toward Amber. "My daughter told me you scammed her out of nearly $10,000. She says you trapped her into paying some inflated bill for a table she didn't even ask for." Amber's head snapped up at that, her eyes wide with panic. Clearly, she hadn't expected her father to escalate things this far. I folded my arms and gave him a measured look. "I understand you're upset, sir, but that's not what happened. If you'll follow me, I'd be happy to show you exactly what took place." He hesitated, then nodded stiffly. I led him and Amber into my office, where I pulled up the security footage from the VIP section. It was all there. Amber strutting in, claiming to be my friend, her loudly ordering 3 rounds of cocktails, the group mocking the staff, and finally, her panicked reaction when the bill arrived. Every word was clear as day. By the time the footage ended, the room was dead silent. Amber's father turned to her, his face red with fury. "What the hell were you thinking?" he roared. "Lying about knowing the owner? Making a fool of yourself and dragging our name through the mud?" Amber mumbled something incomprehensible, her eyes welling up with tears again. But her father wasn't having it. He turned to me and, to his credit, extended a hand. "I apologize for her behavior," he said, his voice tight with embarrassment. "This will not happen again." I shook his hand and nodded. "I appreciate that. For what it's worth, I hope she learns something from this." He didn't reply. Instead, He grabbed Amber by the arm and marched her out of the office. The last thing I heard as they left the restaurant was him berating her, his voice echoing through the dining room. The rest of my staff, who had been trying to stay out of sight, exchanged amused glances as the door closed behind them. Now, the receipt for $9,740 hangs in my office, framed and prominently displayed. It's not just a reminder of that night. It's a lesson. Arrogance and lies can only get you so far before reality catches up. Amber learned that the hard way, and I'll admit I feel a small sense of satisfaction every time I look at that bill.